Thank you all for being here. My name is Evan Chesler. I'm the moderator of this panel on higher education. I am serving currently as the chairman of the Board of Trustees at New York University. And so it's a pleasure to be here to talk about the role of higher education and the relationship between faith and higher education. I want to introduce our distinguished panel. First, sitting all the way to my right is Josh Good. Josh directs the Aspen Institute's Religion and Society program. Seated next to Josh is President Bonnie Cordon, who's the president of the Southern Virginia University. Seated to her left is the Reverend Mark Fowler, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Tannenbaum Center for Interreligious Understanding. And seated to my immediate right is Simran Singh, who's Assistant Professor of Interreligious Histories at the Union Theological Seminary. So we are indeed honored to have these four distinguished panelists on this subject today. Just by way of introduction, I have to say that being the chairman of the university trustee board at a large research university, in fact, for that matter, at any university these days, is an interesting way to spend your time. It's not just what happens virtually every day on campus. It is the sense of the role of higher education in our society. When I was growing up in antediluvian times, it was sort of a clear and unstated message that children were to go to college. That was seen as the path from whatever ladder you happened to be on the socioeconomic ladder to move upward. And it was not a topic of serious conversation at my parents' dinner table. It was simply a conclusion that I was expected to accept, and I did accept it with enthusiasm and optimism. That is no longer, I think, the case at many kitchen tables in many homes in our country, and we're going to explore that and related subjects today and how they particularly intersect with the question of faith. So the format will be that I've got several questions I want to put to the panel. I'll direct each of those questions to one of the members of the panel, but then offer the other members of the panel the opportunity to comment, and hopefully we'll then hear from each of our distinguished members on each of these topics. I also want to thank William Ludlam for his invaluable help in getting this operation going, and without his help, I think all of us agree this would not have happened. First question, and this really is hopefully a segue to the point I started with, which is the perception about the value of higher education today in our country. So the question is, why is higher education losing favor, and what can faith-based programs do to restore support? And I want to direct that question in the first instance to Josh Good.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here. I think I was actually supposed to be on the journalism panel, and then they got an upgrade. McKay Coppin swooped in, and they're like, wait a minute, that guy's a real journalist. You know, you just, it's not your... So I'm sort of in dangerous territory here, so I'm going to talk just a little bit personally for just a few minutes and then throw it open to our smarter panelists and hopefully to you. It seems to me that some of the big rock trends on the campuses these days and in the last several decades are one, sort of a spike in administration, right? We all know the numbers there that been roughly speaking about a 16% faculty uptick on average per school in the United States. It's been closer to a 39% administrators uptick. So that's perhaps in play, right? And then there's sort of always talked about when I went to a little teeny liberal arts Christian college, and I was going to go off to graduate school at Harvard, and somebody said, you got to watch out for the Holy Trinity. You know, you got race, and you got gender, and you got power, and these priorities in the classroom, intellectually, sociologically, in terms of what's esteemed, what's prioritized, have a way of sort of pushing religion or religion as a perspective a bit to the side. So experienced a little bit of that. And then, I guess just as was said in the room a few minutes ago, this idea that sort of religion is increasingly interpreted as a grid for how you vote politically, really an expression of political ideology, has diminished what religion properly is, right? And that's a regretful dynamic that if you are a person of faith on a campus is a bit bumpy. And then I want to just say quickly that my wife was a chaplain at Harvard for 4 years, back in the sort of Peter Gomes era. There were 37 chaplains, and so her role, alongside chaplains of wide-ranging points of view, was to encourage people to kind of find a faith community and run in that space, almost like a parallel culture. And I think those parallel cultures for a lot of students who are at elite schools anyway, that are pretty secular, do exist, have been places of strength and oasis, and then only unfortunately live sometimes side by side with the college as opposed to being more integrated. Now, I called up a smart friend of mine yesterday who runs the Veritas Forum, which has had an incredible run the last decade or so. The number of views on their videos is 12 million. They get John Haidt and David Brooks and the late Tim Keller and the late Rabbi Sachs in front of people, and they have these conversations, and they really sort of stir student perspectives and sort of say, after all, if the search for truth is a big part of campus life, how about this? So he was just saying to me a few things that I thought were interesting, and I wanted to read you a couple of things he said. One was that it's a different moment than it was 10 years ago when we've started this work. Veritas Forum's been around, of course, a long time, but it's a different moment than when I took leadership 10 years ago, Andy said. This part's off the record. It's a different moment. Something is happening downstream from what a lot of faculty members, especially faculty members of faith, have wanted to see happening. And instead of a sort of a straight secular, secular neutral campus, we're seeing openness to pluralism. We're seeing openness to religious pluralism. It's as if these faculty members who had a conviction and wanted to be a part of the common dialogue are 10 years later finding a place. And administrators too, Vandy, others, lots of stories, particular stories, are more open to faith being a part of the larger conversation. And essentially, he just argued that, the ideal that I know a lot of intellectuals have talked about, a lot of people on this, at today's conference talk about, which is sort of thick religious pluralism, different perspectives being given their due, but in a more modest way, because after all, they come from a more creative exilic minority rather than a majority culture. So think the LDS Church, think Seventh-day Adventists, think Orthodox Jews, think Black Christians. If your experience, and your experience is certainly this on the campus as a person of faith, as a professor, if your experience is that of a minority in society, you don't want hegemonic majority power and control. You just want to be able to have a free expression of your tradition. You just want to be able to live your life in a smaller community group, right? And so he's just basically saying that is happening at a pace and a speed that he has not seen before. What would it take for faith-based communities, you asked, to help make pluralism or make our schools more open to religious expression? It seems to me it's a sense of getting pluralism right. And it seems to me it's also this sense of exilic minority status. What does it say in Exodus 22 is that, remember that you were strangers once. You're going to remain, strangers. You were sojourners once in the land. Don't forget it when you come into your power. Somehow, it seems that a few more people of deep faith are coming into their power and remembering their exilic status and hopefully stewarding their power in a way that makes room for all.
Thank you, Josh. Let me put to the group, do you see any turn in the trend line of declining popularity of higher education in light of what Josh has said? Has there been any improvement? Is this trend line changing? Is faith playing any role in that? Or is the trend line still declining, notwithstanding the presence of some more hospitable circumstances for faith on campus? Let me ask President Corden if you want to weigh in.
That's a great question, and I think to your point and the things that you brought out, higher education sometimes does lose favor, and when it feels transactional, and if people look at education just as I'm doing this to get a paycheck to get out, I think it is losing favor because people look at a lot of different ways to gain knowledge now. But I think with faith, they can reframe education. What does it look like as a faith-based person to seek after education? And it's transformational instead of transactional. And I think there really comes a time that you realize that you're doing it to become. Yes, you'll get a paycheck and all those good things will happen, but it's transforming an individual.
Yeah, I mean,
Sorry, Professor.
I would echo, I'm so glad you used that language because it at my institution where I'm teaching now, it's a seminary, and we've been talking about, well, what are we trying to do here, right? It's sort of a revisiting of our mission and vision and our purpose, and we keep coming back to this focus on formation. We're here for formation. And that feels so different from the transactional piece that you're describing, because when I talk to young people and I say, well, why not school? And they're like, well, I'm going to end up in debt. I'm not going to be able to get out, and I'm not going to be able to get a job. And instead, I could do this sort of, I could drive an Uber and do DoorDash, and I could do these 10 other things and still have my freedom. And so it ends up being very much sucked into this capitalist system that says you are what you earn, as opposed to you are who you become, right? Which is the formation and the transformation.
It's going to have an eternal purpose.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
when it becomes
exactly.
eternal, then they realize that it's part of their change.
Reverend Fowler, do you have a view on this?
Just a quick word that, and I love how Spirit operates, because this morning I started thinking about Occupy Wall Street. So in 2011, we had this mass protest of young people basically saying that the contract that they had signed to go and get undergraduate degrees and graduate degrees, and that they would be able to get jobs that would allow them to support themselves and to build families, et cetera, was broken. The interesting thing about Occupy Wall Street that was, I think, less kind of highlighted is that the majority of people who were protesting at Occupy Wall Street were white people. And I bring that up because there is an intricate balance when people are deciding how and when and why to access higher education. And there is that transactional nature for many people, because education broadly defined, but higher education in particular, remained or seemed to be the ticket to escaping poverty. Not necessarily escaping their belief systems, but escaping poverty. And, to this day, there's a little church in the Bronx that has, and I mean, they sold their building and are now smaller than they were 10 years ago, that still has a scholarship fund. And the best that they generally do is can give a student $500 one time towards their education, because within the community, education is seen still as the vehicle. And to both of the points that you're bringing up, one of the things that I'm kind of left with after the conversations this morning is we tend to talk about these topics in isolation. And it is, I think, all of what has been expressed on the panel thus far. It is having the opportunity and, to a certain degree, having the economic privilege to be able to consider that I want to focus on my formation as much as I need to address the financial considerations of myself and the people in my family and community. I think it is also this driving idea of what is the existing social contract Who is it for in regarding higher education, and how historically many faith communities use their faith as a way to navigate and survive the system as it exists, and hopefully at some point in the future might be able to transform it or offer something different. And I think just looking a little bit more of a historical lens, what we see happening in society today is people are valuing freedom, which means that they're able to identify in some way a way in which they are bound by the society and the structure in higher education that exists today, and they seek a different pathway. And the last thing I'll say is that I think we want to start asking different questions. We want to start asking, as opposed to asking questions for young people to validate the decisions that they're making, we want to ask more curious questions as to how did you come to this path? How did you come to this understanding?
Great, thank you. Let me turn to a question that we, those of us in the legal profession, as I am, are constantly debating in the current context, which is the First Amendment. It's been around for a very long time. Indeed, it was the first one. But we still seem not to be absolutely clear as a country what it includes and doesn't include. And I want to ask this question of Professor Singh. Is there a tension between the First Amendment protections and the role of faith in higher education? And if there is, how can that tension best be navigated?
Yeah, thank you. To the first part of your question, is there a tension? I think the answer is yes. That's the easy part, at least for me in my role here. And I think we don't have to look very far to see some examples, some very resounding examples of recent. Charlie Kirk is one example of not so far removed from now, the encampments and the protests on campus and the response to the campus protests. I mean, these are flashpoints that, I just have to say one name and you know what I'm talking about. I say one word and you know what I'm talking about. These are cultural flashpoints, and they are motivated by, animated by, and also discussed within the frame of religion. So absolutely, these are significant tensions, and then we add to that prohibitions on public universities on their ability to inhibit or promote particular religions, a requirement to stay neutral on these issues within their non-discrimination policies typically, to hold a position of neutrality. And that's for public universities. Private universities also often have federal funding. We've been seeing how that has been playing out in the last few years, especially in the last year. They have often grants that they're required to uphold, and also a standard of academic rigor that is expected culturally as a norm. And so this is what's at play. To just sort of name a couple of examples, as a professor in a classroom, it is important to me that I am not seen as imposing a religious viewpoint, even though my students know and see that I am religious. What would it look like to be perceived as being discriminatory in my teaching, in my evaluation of them, right? So that's a line we have to be careful about. Similarly, I am a Sikh who is teaching at a historic Christian seminary. What if, when I applied, the university denied my application and said, on the basis of your religious identity, we are not going to hire you, right? These are active, very active questions that play out in the everyday lives of people who are engaged in these communities. And so I think in terms of what do we do about that, that's the hard question, right? The first question is, are there tensions? The answer is, I think, yes. The question is, so what do we do? And that's the question that I think our country and those of us in the higher education space are really grappling with. And Josh, I really liked your invocation of this point around a thick religious pluralism. And we're seeing a move on many college campuses now to adopt the language of pluralism, to bring forward curricula around pluralism. And what's interesting to me is For a long time, we have talked about free expression on college campuses. We haven't really talked so much about modeling conversations on difficult topics. And so what does it look like, not just to have a space, right, a safe space where students could go and feel like they could talk freely, but also to have from people who have experience and maturity, an ability to sit side by side and talk about things they don't necessarily agree about, right? Like we don't really have that modeled for us culturally, right? If you turn on the news, it's 4 people on one channel agreeing on the same point, and you turn to the next channel and it's 4 people agreeing on a different point, right? So we don't really know what it looks like to do this, and also we don't really have avenues to practice. And I'll just give you a personal example of this that came up recently to sort of hammer home the point around the importance of the practice. I was with some friends. We were talking about a significant political issue that had come up, and there was disagreement among us. And we were friends enough that I was not surprised that they disagreed with me, that I disagreed with them. But I felt really uncomfortable saying that I disagreed and why. And I avoided it, and eventually they asked me 3 times, and finally I said what I thought. And the reason I was nervous was because I was afraid what would happen to our relationship. And I think that's true for a lot of us. But in being able to say what I thought and our relationship staying, then I was able to, that built confidence in our relationship, and it built a sense of trust that I can say to you, hey, here's what I think. This is my perspective. And you can say, oh, I see that. I didn't think about that before. Right? It's really scary in the moment when it happens, but when we have spaces where in community we can do that, it changes the possibility, and it creates a possibility for transformation. So those are just a few reflections in terms of where we are and what we can do, but I'd love to hear more from you all.
Josh?
I can say one quick thing, which is just that on that beautiful point about conversations being modeled on campuses and the ability to have richer conversations with people who have different points of view. I'm from Washington, D.C., and in D.C. they say that the definition of listening is waiting your turn to speak. And it would be refreshing, right, to have a few more conversations where you actually listen to the person and grow and learn and change. And what's the other laugh line along this direction? This is that the columnist, the New York Times columnist David Brooks likes to say, nobody goes to a conference to hear the speaker speak. You go to a conference to hear yourself speak. So I like that too. No, that's really rich. I think that's particularly the charge to disagree better. You go to college not to get whitewashed. You go to college to disagree well.
President Corden, how does this play out at your
Well, this
college?
is kind of a fun space for us, and we're grateful for the Wheatley Institute and people like you all that really do believe in the young adults. So Braver Angels has come in, and with Washington and Lee and VMI, which is Virginia Military Institute, and Southern Virginia University, the students have an opportunity to discuss, to disagree, but not be disagreeable. And they learn the process of what does it look like to bring up issues and to discuss, and how you can listen and step back from your own position and maybe put yourself in the shoes of someone else. And it really does take a whole village. I mean, we probably wouldn't have done this if others wouldn't have come in, like the Wheatley Institute and Braver Angels, and actually gave them a format. But we have a peacemaking class now, and we can't get enough seats in the class because everyone wants to take it. So I think the interesting point is our young people, the students, they are seeking a pattern, a structure, so that they can have success in being able to lend their voice, listen, and be okay to disagree, but not be disagreeable.
Okay. Reverend?
I think the only thing that I would add to that, and I, count on this panel, even in our early conversations, to not have a whole lot to say, but yet I'm finding things to say. Just, I guess, 2 or 3 things. One is that the conversation in the room earlier today about the ongoing evolving of the First Amendment is something that I think when we talk about kind of like the state of the country, et cetera, is that we don't think about the Constitution and or the amendments as living document, as constantly in the state of evolving. And the whole idea of the denial of benefits and who does it burden, with some of the decisions that were talked about, we do see the possibility of people being burdened by the now kind of huge runway for my personal religious beliefs versus yours, or my personal religious beliefs and some other aspect of your identity that is in contrast with mine, and therefore I now have the legal right to discriminate against you. That is one of the things that did not come out of the, partially because of time, I'm sure, but that didn't come out in the, conversation earlier. The other thing that I would say is that, a comment that I'll make later, but to, tee it up, the whole idea of the practice of humility means that all of us who don't practice peace building can start telling the truth about that. That we don't have the capacity, we don't have the experience, we don't have the expertise, and there are people and places and organizations and institutions, both secular and faith-based, that can come in not just to the higher education community, but other communities to be able to model and train and teach that, standing on the high moral ground of your religious or spiritual practice is not peace building. It's insufficient for the task. And unfortunately, I think some of the things that we've seen in the protests on campus, et cetera, is that we have people who have no expertise in that and actually no commitment to it. Because a lot of what I've seen has been trying to manage chaos and still look good and still look holy. And that has never been a formula that works for religious or secular people. So that.
Thank you. So let me turn to the next topic. I say to students at my university that we want their 4 years with us to be the best years of their lives. We don't always achieve that goal. It's hard. But student experience is the focus of what universities are about. And so my question is, what is the role of faith in the student experience, and does it work? Madam President.
This was a fun question to actually study and to ponder. And so I hope you take this question home with you. What is the role of faith in higher education and for students? I think the interesting thing is, as we talk about institutions and higher education, let's not forget we're talking about students. We're talking about lives, and we do tell them, this is going to be the best, and you're going to have all of these opportunities. But what are we actually saying? What are we telling them that they either have to check at the door or that they can bring with them? So our prophet, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and President Russell M. Nelson spoke to youth and young adults to a worldwide devotional, and he said something that really has made me pause. And he said, my dear younger brothers and sisters, you're among the best the Lord has ever sent to this world. Now that says so much about who we're educating, if these are the best that have ever been sent to this world. But he went on to say something that really piqued my attention. He said, you have the capacity to be smarter and wiser and have more impact on the world than any previous generation. Now, he didn't say they are smarter or they are wiser or they really will have more impact. But he did say you have the capacity. And so you stop and ponder, what are we bringing to our higher education in a way that these young people can have the capacity to become their whole self? And what does that look like? President Nelson also went on to say that education is a religious responsibility. And so I think it does take it out of that transactional into that transforming space, if it is a religious responsibility. And then to add another, one of my favorite scriptures is the glory of God is intelligence. And so I looked at this and I thought I would just share something that visually, I'm a visual learner. And so let's see if it works. So there's a stained glass that is at the Southern Virginia University. And when you walk into the main hall, this is what you see. It's magnificent. And when the light shines through it, seriously, every fragment, as you can see, glows. Colors deepen, shapes sharpen, and the whole piece comes alive. However, without life, it's just glass. It's dull, it's flat, it's fragmented. And that's a visual of the power of faith in the student's experience when they can bring their whole self of what that looks like. Faith is the light that gives color, purpose, and harmony to the many pieces of the student's life. Their academics, their relationships, their challenges, their dreams. Are we allowing that to flourish, or is it just sidelined? Are we helping that? So as I looked at it, I thought, what is it faith does for our students at the universities? And so I'm just going to go over just a few because of time, but faith creates belonging and becoming. I've traveled throughout the world. Before I was a university president, I was the general young woman for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so traveling all over the world, I sat knee to knee with so many different young people all over the world, Mongolia, Africa, Brazil, and they all had two questions. They wanted to know who they were and if they mattered, if their lives mattered. What was their purpose? And so when you can bring in a space their faith, it helps them know their identity. And when young people really do know that they belong to a God and that their purpose matters, their lives matter, it changes who they are. In fact, it changes their reactions to others. It changes their reaction to hard things. It changes their approach to actually learning. And the other thing that faith does, it invites purpose and resilience. And that has been really interesting to watch. You had a group of COVID kids, and they were afraid to even gather. And one of the things that universities does that is so unique that you can't do necessarily online is to be in that space together. Young people love to gather with young people, and it's a powerful thing. When I walk with the students, I say, well, what do you do in a difficult situation? And they always, I love walking with them. They're like, when I'm struggling, I love to pray. When I'm struggling, I love to open up a scripture. Or I turn to my mom and say, what's your counsel? And she always sends me her favorite scripture quote. But these things like that allow the students to let their faith shine and let them be in a space that they can have that confidence. I think faith inspires service on college campuses. And one of the things that we often prize achievement over character, but when they realize that they can be part, I think these young people, they're hungry to be part of something that matters. And they want a cause. But let me just tell you a quick story. So Taylor, she came from a single mom, never thought she'd go to college, found herself with lots of help at Southern Virginia University. But when she was a little girl, she lived in public housing, and they had a little playground or a park. It was just dirt and a broken swing. But somebody who cared came in and transformed this park for her. And she remembers playing, and it was a happy space. It was colorful. So when she got to Southern Virginia, she was in a class, and they were talking about what can you do. And she realized, she says, I want to go about doing good like the Savior. So she applied for a grant because she had no money. So she applied for a grant, and she got it. And she collected friends from the university and said, let's transform this playground. So she went to the projects, the government housing, and she found a park just like the one that she had played in dirt. And what did she do? They used that money to fix the swings, to fix it, paint up the basketball hoop, make it look like a park. And these young people, and what she said to me when I said, well, tell me why you did this, Taylor. And she said, I'm just trying to follow Christ. I want to go about and do good. And I realize I don't have to wait to become a leader. I'm a leader now. And so what faith does is it helps them see outside themselves, and where there's anxiety and struggles, it makes a difference. So those are just some things. I know our time's short. You could go on and on. But where do you see faith having a role with students?
I mean, I was just thinking, as you were speaking a little bit about how different the sociological experience is if you're at a faith-based school than if you're at a big, if you're in an elite school or if you're a mainstream secular institution. Right there, about 4,000 colleges in the United States. About 800 or so are faith-based schools in some way or another.
Very small amount.
Small amount, but still a sizable amount. So if you're in one of those, it's a unique experience. I went to a college like that too, and that's a different experience. And yet, the ways that those dynamics change affect the whole culture. What Simran was saying earlier about performative versus formative. You've heard this idea that our schools are also a reflection of the culture at large. And it turns out, if you have most of the sort of leadership primarily being performative in their action, getting a bigger Twitter following, getting a better podcast, getting more metrics, getting more followers. If that's the norm in our public life generally, it's gonna drag down to the campuses, just as the campuses over the course of 20 or 30 or 50 years will impact the culture, right? So I think that performative contra formative is a huge challenge, enemy to actual formation, like you were talking about, Simran. I also think it's important to talk about pluralism as sameness, and not just pluralism as difference. We tend to say a lot about distinctions between communities and trying to understanding those, and curiosity about that. But there's a sameness, and Dan Porterfield was talking about this the other night as well, which was lovely, to maintain and to remember as teachers who are pouring into people across traditions. And then finally, I just got to say, being a completely outnumbered Anglican in this room, where the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is pretty much running this show. I was told this great story. You've probably heard it, so if you have, don't spoil the ending, okay? But the Pope was having lunch at the Vatican about a month ago, and an attendant knocks at the door and says, Your Holiness, I have good news and bad news. Which would you like to hear? And the Pope says, I'm an optimist. Let's hear the good news. And he says, well, Jesus Christ has returned to earth. He's on the telephone. He'd like to speak with you. And the Pope says, well, what's the bad news? And he says, he's calling from Salt Lake City.
Okay, does
In the
faith
interest
work?
of-
Yes.
yes.
You asked, does faith work?
Yes.
It does, if you allow them to freely express what they believe in their hearts, not coerced.
Thank you. In the interest of time, let me go to my fourth question. Did he reverse the charges, by the way? Fourth question. We should always end by looking forward, I think, the future. So this question is directed to the future. And the question is, what should change in the future with respect to the role of faith in higher education? And I want to direct this to Reverend Fowler.
The first thing I think is really critically important today and moving forward is that in all of the concerns around the experiences of college students, the environments of college students in universities, we tend to talk about people as, or talk about young people as those young people, or the troublesome ones versus the ones who are good and the ones who have these skills for peace building, as opposed to interacting with them as our children. And as someone who does not have children, it's always interesting to me that we tend to there's this narrative that the young people kind of got dropped off freshman year, and then something happened to them that was unlike their rearing or unlike how they had been trained to believe, et cetera. And I've got to believe that the 17 or 18 years that they were with you had something to do with the way in which they're acting on that campus. I'm just glad I said what I said. That somehow there was a little bit of preparation for the behavior that they are engaging in. So that needs to change. This idea that the university and the professors are all at fault, et cetera, is kind of like when you get up and look in the mirror, there ought to be something you could identify that your fingerprint is on as to why your children are carrying on the way that they are. I also think that one of the things that's really critical in this idea of how can faith help young people is across traditions, encouraging young people to practice discernment. And those who are supporting and advising them also to practice discernment, to not necessarily be whipped up by your emotions simply because they're your emotions, and we have a legal structure that's now supporting I can feel any way that I want and do anything that I want because I feel the way that I want. So I do think that something that's going to be really critical, and this for me is just a reflection of the academic process. It is critical inquiry, although that has almost become an illegal word. But the idea of critically looking at the situation that you find yourself in, being able to honestly and authentically reflect on how you are contributing to that circumstance, and then be able to say, what is next, or what would that which I believe have me do? So giving young people almost, if you will, there's kind of like humility has a bad rap. When we talk about humility, we often talk about it from the perspective of, oh, well, you're giving up or you're being weak, et cetera. But the true practice of humility is actually letting that which you believe, striving for that which you say you believe to be fully expressed in your life for the value of others, not just about you. Spiritual maturity is something, I'm also an instructor at One Spirit Interfaith Seminary, and in a class that we offer around ministering to diverse communities, we talk about spiritual maturity. And I adapted this model from an evangelical pastor who had these 5 characteristics on his blog post, and I think that they are critical for us all to practice, but also to give the opportunity for young people to practice. The first is a passion for application, a capacity to apply your knowledge of the divine in love. Because we often see people practicing what they think the divine wants them to do, not in love, but for domination and dominion. Humility, and the practice of humility is a modest and realistic view of one's own importance. And only you have to ask somebody what's not great in your life right now. And people have the opportunity to really recognize where they are in the state of things. Because in the midst of all of this controversy, people are still dying. People are still dealing with chronic diseases. Huge numbers of people are unemployed and or navigating poverty. Like, there's a little bit of a luxury that sometimes we have to be able to kind of sit and converse and talk about when people are going through some really serious things. A servant's heart, a quest about others and not yourself. So one of the things I think is really important for young people in universities, even in the entire educational experience, is to give them opportunities to be less concerned about themselves. Because at this particular moment in society, we have evolved into this individualistic expression of only what I need is the most important thing first. And even in tragedy, you know, the great grief that I had during the COVID pandemic is while people were arguing about whether they should wear or mask or not paying any attention to the fact that their actions could actually kill someone. And more concerned about their own personal agency than the surviving of humanity. So the question then becomes, what more will it take for us to actually practice humility? and to be concerned about others and ourselves. And finally, we ask for people to look at a deep investment in an interfaith and interspiritual world. Now, we are preparing interfaith and interspiritual ministers for the world. So across traditions, what is that deep investment? Not in a world where your practice is the practice, but a world where practices, and even those who don't have a practice, and the little misleading information about the unaffiliated population is that many, almost all of the people in the unaffiliated population have rituals, they have beliefs, they're just not going someplace with a book and putting money in a plate. But they have beliefs and morals that guide their day-to-day actions. So, big picture, I think we need to humble ourselves and teach young people how to humble themselves. And then ask, seek, what would you have me do? Because in the absence of that, we're doing things saying that God told us to do it when that didn't happen. And when you lie on the Creator, woe unto you.
Thank you. I want to thank our panel for that wonderful discussion. Thank you so much, all of you. I believe we have a presentation of, yes? Let me get out of your way.
Let's call it a word.
Is that what they call it?
Thank you. That was inspiring. Would you all please join me in welcoming Reverend Q English, who will be presenting the award for elevating higher education.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Well, I am honored today. So Chancellor Schwartz has modeled how higher education and religious ethics can be seamlessly woven together. At JTS, scholarship is never separated from moral vision. Students receive a strong education and cultivate a lifelong love of Jewish learning that inspires them to live out the values nurtured during their years there. Inspired by Chancellor Louis Finkelstein's vision, through the Eternal Light series, the Institute for Religious and Social Studies and the Conference on Science, Philosophy, and Religion, she has carried this mission forward. Over the last 5 years, she has deepened JTS's engagement through public convenings on issues vital to the Jewish community, our nation and humanity, and through partnerships with interfaith and higher education communities. As Dean of JTS's Albert A. List College and Gershon Keck's Graduate School, she launched a BA major and MA in Jewish ethics and a dual degree MA in Jewish ethics and public health with Columbia University. The program enables students to evaluate public health challenges from a Jewish ethical perspective. Under her leadership, the MA in spiritual care was also established through the Division of Lifelong and Professional Studies. This innovative program combines theoretical learning with clinical training, preparing students to provide spiritually based support in challenging times. Rooted in Jewish values, yet welcoming participants from all traditions, it reflects JTS's belief that authentic leadership must be both grounded and inclusive. And in light of rising anti-Semitism, Chancellor Schwartz cultivated partnerships with neighboring institutions to respond collaboratively. 1 year after October 7, 2023, JTS invited neighbors to an open house in the Sukkah for conversation and hope. She also hosted a symposium on campus anti-Semitism, bringing together New York City college presidents to address this urgent concern. It is our privilege to present the Award for Achievement in Elevating Higher Education to Chancellor Shuli Rubin Schwartz.
Thank you so much. I am honored and humbled to be in this group, to be in this company, to be partners with you in doing this important work. The challenges are great, but the opportunities are greater. And I hope that a day like this is one that inspires us to think about those opportunities and how to turn those challenges into a better, brighter, and more meaningful future for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. I think lunch awaits.